Welcome, welcome, welcome to Who's in the Room. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Good Old Girls Network channel. I'm giving this a shot to go live from TikTok and from YouTube to talk about relationships. I think in my previous life, but certainly in my next is one, I 100% would like to be a relationship specialist. They fascinate me, and we're going to talk about all the reasons why. So if people come late, if people check in and don't mean to be here, I will check the comments as much as I can along the way. But again, this is being recorded. So I want to make sure that I get all the information out and then we can revisit it and have discussions on it. And I certainly will check the chat. So welcome to the Good Old Girls Live, Good Old Girls Network Live. We're talking about relationships. And we're going to dive into different types of relationships, familial, platonic, romantic, your relationship with yourself, your professional relationships. But in addition to that, we're going to talk about some dynamics that happen within each of those relationships that sometimes can make it tricky. And then we're going to talk about where love fits into all of this. Because I've had so many conversations with people, mostly women, will say things as reasons why they don't want to change is, oh, but I love him. Unfortunately, love is not enough. And we're going to talk about why you can love someone but not be able to show it. And I know that that's something that we've heard before. So that's not a huge surprise. So let's jump right in. We're going to talk about familial relationships, right? These are family ties that are often rooted in history and obligation, but it doesn't always mean that they're emotionally healthy, right? Sometimes people have sisters, brothers, cousins, mothers, fathers that they don't have a relationship with other than the fact that they are blood. What is interesting is people will say things like, but that's my sister. She should absolutely. No, same blood doesn't mean same core values. It doesn't mean same belief system. It doesn't mean same standards. And sometimes we are holding people accountable for relationships because we're putting assumptions on what the relationship should mean. We can also sometimes have expectations of people, as I mentioned, because somebody might say, well, that's her mother. She should absolutely do X, Y, and Z. Those expectations that we place upon the titles are something that's coming from a definition that we've decided that the other person didn't necessarily sign on for. A mother could even have a child thinking that they're going to love that baby the best way they can. And as they go throughout life, they realize that they weren't necessarily cut out for it. I unfortunately know quite a few relationships that some people have with their mothers that aren't ideal. But what does an ideal relationship look like with your mother? You know, one of the reasons I like having this conversation is because we were never really taught how to be in relationship or what it means to be in relationship with your sister, with your cousin, with your significant other, right? We observed. People told us how to be in relationship. We had experiences, some of them traumatic, which maybe informed the way that we were going to be in relationship. But nobody ever, rarely, I should say, talked to us about expectations and how you have to know your personnel, right? Sometimes you have platonic friends that have your back more than a blood relative, and that's okay. We don't have to hold that against them. Parental relationships, a child or a parent, a relationship, it could be biological or adopted. And it could be full of fierce, unconditional love, or the love can feel conditional. Now, we say things, and one of the things that we're railing against within the Good Old Girls Network is this notion that we should know how things are, or this is how things should be. And so, you know, sometimes parents have conditional love for us. They also weren't taught how to be in relationships. So there's a point of grace that I ask that we give people. Over time, there can be a dynamic shift. You could have had an amazing relationship with a parent when you were younger, but as time went on, and what I believe happens is that as your values come into view, and as your parents or your parent starts to live out their values, what you may realize is that you all don't share the same core values. You may not share the same belief system. You may not share the same standards, and you may not share the same priorities. Now, if all four of those are off kilter, it is very difficult to make even love, which is very powerful, be the thing that keeps you together, that keeps you bound. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship, but you'll have to release the expectation of the relationship that you thought was going to be simply because that person was called parent or because that person was called child. One of the things that I have learned, having done this work for so long, I have two children. They are 2 years apart. They are both boys, men, male, young men. And from a very young age, I started asking them about their pet peeves. Why were they so upset with this person? Why did that make them so angry when I said this? And what I started to learn about my children is that they had their own set of core values. Some of them matched mine and some of them did not. Enters standards, right? They live in this house. And so there are standards that must be met. Why? Because I'm in charge of this household. I understand there's particular values that we don't share, but there are still standards that have to be met. And that often shows up at work, right? If you've decided that you are going to, I'm stealing some of my own thunder. If you've decided that you need a particular job, and you're not going to leave the job, they have standards. Sometimes those standards don't align with your core values. Sometimes holding those standards or meeting those standards may bump up against your core values, causing what I call a value confrontation. When you experience too many value confrontations over time, it starts to vex your spirit. Have you ever started out a job and you were so excited? You thought this was going to be the thing. It may not have even been your dream job, but it was a new job because you didn't like the old job. And maybe 6 months in, you start to realize that communication isn't flowing and you value communication. Maybe you realize that people aren't as considerate when it comes to thinking about policies and things that affect you, and you value consideration. What happens over time is that good employee, labels on the table for a moment, that good employee turns bad. Why? Because over time, when we experience continual value confrontation, it erodes something in us. Sometimes we can remember times where we used to be so happy, where we used to be more at peace. Check your core values. Check the areas of your life where your values may not be aligned with the life that you're living. It's so important. Get those core values in tow. Ask yourself when it comes to parental, how do I express and receive love in this particular relationship? Love comes in many different forms. Know your personnel. If you've known that this particular cousin has never been one to sit and do hair and drink tea and share all the tea, then don't expect that from that person. But how do you notice that that person gives love? Because a lot of times we're looking for reciprocity. Well, I did this, therefore I would like you to do that. And again, we're often operating from our guiding principles. What? Our values, our standards, our priorities, and our beliefs. Okay, let's go to platonic friendships. One of the most underrated forms of love. How many times we've gotten out of a romantic relationship and we are feeling down and I'm never going to find love? No, no, no. Love's all around. Love is all around. True friendship can be deeply values-based and healing. And love here can look like a few different things: loyalty, a genuine interest in the other person's growth or well-being, right? There's not a lot of jealousy in these relationships when it's healthy. Now, in relationships, here's the interesting thing to me is that oftentimes relationships will start out with a particular bond. It could be you met this person in kindergarten, you all were in the same class, you had the same teacher, and as you moved out throughout life, you moved together. That is very rare. Maybe you met a person on an airplane and you became best buds on the airplane and you exchanged phone numbers and Instagram and you said, we're going to keep in touch. And the reason why this conversation could have been so fruitful is maybe both of you experienced the same trauma. Now, I know people will automatically say, oh, that's a trauma bond. Maybe. But maybe it is just a shared experience. Maybe both people have actually healed from the trauma, but what they're bonding on is the same experience. You're just thinking, oh my gosh, I love her. I love her. Sorry, I smacked my microphone if that was loud. Oh, I love her. She's so amazing. She's so amazing. She's so amazing. Or he's so amazing. But this is the Good Old Girls Network. So we're talking about women here. And then you start to visit with that person. Maybe you all don't live in the same city. Maybe you do. But you start going out to dinner. Maybe you travel with this person and you start to realize that the way they move, the things that they value, the way that they value things is so different from you. But what happens? It's similar to romantic love bombing. It was so strong and so amazing in the beginning that we want it back. We want that feeling that we had with the person in the beginning. So we hold tight and we keep going and we press on. But when we start to notice that when we leave that person, we're exhausted. We may call another friend and say, I didn't have a really good, I love her, but, right? And that's when we start having the meetings after the meetings around the experiences or the value confrontations that we're experiencing, but that we don't always or often have a name for. If we can start to name the value confrontation that we're having, then what that will do is it'll allow us to gain understanding. But what normally happens? We start to experience these value confrontations. Maybe the person is late often, right? And you value efficiency, you value timeliness. There's a couple of other values that could cause value confrontations when a person is late. So you start to notice that this person is often late and you start to feel disrespected, right? You might not want to, your energy is different because they're not as, they might say, oh my God, girl, I'm so sorry. I got a late start today. And they're acting like it's not a big deal, but to you, you are vexed. And so now your energy is different. But really what it means is that person doesn't value efficiency and time in the way that you value it. But if you can name it, here I actually had this exact situation. There was a friend of mine who would often be late. I shouldn't say often because I couldn't let it happen too many times because what I noticed is that when we would get to the event, I'd be different. So we might be going to an event. Hey, are we riding together? Yes, we're riding together. That person shows up 20 minutes late. I get to the event. It takes me a minute to get back into my space. Instead of talking about that friend badly or saying she's disrespectful, I noticed that I value efficiency and consideration. And when she was late, it caused a value confrontation for me. So going forward, here was the plan. Hey, let's call her Jessica. Hey, Jess, are you going to this event? Yes. Do you want to ride together? Oh, absolutely. And I say, no problem. Here's the thing. I actually want to go to the networking portion of the event. So I'm going to leave my house at 5:30. And I just know that if you're not there by 5:30, then I'll see you at the event. No hard feelings. No reason to make her try to become me. No reason to hold her to my values. The thing about core values is that they make so much sense to us that we think everybody should have them. I've said this many times before. Has someone ever told you a story and they are livid? I mean, you can almost really see smoke coming out of their heads. They're telling you about the thing that happened, and they get to the end of it, and you're like, "Hmm, I don't get it." You don't know why that person is so upset. Why? Because their buttons aren't your buttons. Their core values aren't your core values. All right, let's keep going. So, a lot of platonic relationships start to fray when we don't have an understanding of our core values. Why? Because we're one, holding those persons, those people, to our understanding of what it means to be a good friend. How many times have you had an onboarding to a friendship or a relationship where you all sit down and you say, what do you mean when you say friend? Here's what I mean when I say friend. What do you mean when you say you're loyal? Here's what I mean. And then you find out, oh, well, actually, loyalty isn't really a value for me. Huh? Wait, what do you mean by that? That explanation will help you to understand your personnel. Romantic, platonic, familial, I don't care what kind of relationship it is. Understanding what is important to that person, what their core values are, and their what? Their standards, their priorities, and their beliefs are. That's the sharing. That's the exchange that starts to help you to understand who you're dealing with so that you don't hold them accountable or have expectations for them to be you. Okay. Romantic relationships. Now, I know we could have a whole other live on this, and we might. So, if you all would love to see that or like to see that or interested in a conversation about romantic relationships on the journey to fulfillment, let's do it. These are where we expect the most love to come from. That's how we end up expecting that the people we're in relationship with romantically are going to be our everything. They're going to be our friend. They're going to be our lover. They're going to be our confidant. They're going to be the person that isn't late because they understand that we don't like to be late. Well, do they share that value? Do they share that value? We're going to talk about the elements that come within these relationships. So let me get to it. Okay, romantic love can be transformative, affirming, and joyful, but it can also become codependent, transactional, or performative. Intimate relationships are rooted in affection, attraction, or companionship. They also can start out in the same way that I talked about platonic relationships. They can start out on a common bond or understanding. Sometimes you believe that that is your person because you're really both emotionally unavailable. Sometimes that becomes your person because you both have to be with people. So, understanding what that sensation is that you're giving or that you're receiving and where it's coming from. Then, once you have that, when you understand your core values, it doesn't matter how good this feels. You're going to go back to your core values and you're going to see, do their values align? You don't have to have the same values, but when you are in relationship with someone in any of the areas that we talked about, and you don't even have values that go together, like thoughtfulness and kindness, like consideration and thoughtfulness. There are values that do well together, and there are those that bump up against one another. Now, that is not to say that you can't ever be in a relationship with someone that does not share all of your values or align with all of your values. What it means is that once you can name the value confrontation, then you can figure out what the workaround is if this is a person that you would like to have in your life. Sometimes when we have misaligned values, it means that there's only a certain amount of time we can walk with the person. So that doesn't mean like, 1 to 3 years, although reason, season, lifetime. But sometimes it means that you can't spend as much time with that person because your values don't align and it causes the friction that you get worn out around this person. So that's not a person maybe that you could spend a week-long vacation with. But maybe you love having dinner and coffee because you make each other laugh and you can share stories about certain things. You understand what I'm saying? So in here, you want to ask yourself, is this love nurturing or is it depleting? And then you can start to dig into why it's nurturing, why it's depleting. Professional relationships, these are at work, bosses, coworkers, clients, and they can be functional, strategic, or aligned. Now, love here might sound odd, but respect, empathy, and shared values are all forms of professional love. They are all forms of professional love. You can also have toxic work environments that feel loveless because they lack respect, care, and integrity. I know what that feels like, but I couldn't name it at the time. And so when you can't name it, what happens is you start to have these emotional reactions instead of strategic responses, right? When I can name why it bothers me that a person might be trying to impose their views on me, I know it's because I value consideration, and that imposition feels as if they are not being considerate of me. But since I know that, I can handle that person strategically instead of emotionally. But when I had no understanding of my core values, of my standards, then I would have a visceral emotional response. I might shut the person down. We might have a back and forth. But now that I have understanding, I can decide that if I'm going to engage, why I'm going to engage or not. In a professional relationship, you want to ask, do I feel seen, respected, and safe to grow here? Right? Lastly, it is our relationship with ourselves. Again, that will be another live that happens in the future. This is the most important relationship, one that I have been working on for eternity. And I am elated that that came on my radar is something to work on. To have those self talks with yourself that are affirming, those self talks where you are your own best friend. When you do something or you look back and you have regret or you don't like a decision that you made, step outside of the situation and think about what you would tell your best friend, even if it's a little tough love, right? These aren't always flowery conversations that are supposed to be filled with, placations, but no, that was wrong. Maybe you don't want to say that going forward. Maybe you want to do something differently going forward, and you can. And so you're offering yourself that kind word and those things that help you to feel differently about the situation. Okay, let's get into the deeper parts of relationships. And these are within the categories of relationships that we talked about. There are functional relationships, values based relationships, and transactional relationships. So let's talk about what those mean. Functional relationships are based on duties, roles, or responsibilities. We talk because we have to, not because we want to. Love may exist here, but it's often unspoken or buried under obligation. For example, a sibling you coordinate with for family matters, but don't confide in emotionally, right? It's functional. You all do something for each other, but there's not an exchange of information. And again, you may love, but you're not sitting around. You don't necessarily share values. Functional relationships can also show up when there is trauma. So if you're a person who never felt included as a young person, right, in your family, in your neighborhood, and you find a group or a person or friend, a family member who always includes you, but you don't necessarily like being in the group or with the person that's including you, but that sensation of being included feels so good that you are foregoing what you know to be true, and that feeling that you're having that your values don't necessarily align, but you want that sensation. That's a functional relationship. Now the question becomes, what happens, and this is how you can tell when it's functional, When you're looking at a relationship and you're talking about what's the exchange, what is the give, what is the receive, your question becomes what happens when and if that person can no longer provide that thing? Does the relationship fall apart, or can you land on the values? Can you land on the values, which leads me to values-based relationships. These are not common, I would like to say. Values-based relationships are not common. Why? Because most people have no idea what their core values are. I certainly did not when I started this work. I had a reckoning in my life where I looked around and realized that I was unfulfilled despite the amazing life that I had on paper. And what I discovered was that my life was not aligned with my core values. So then I had to dig. Well, first of all, I had to identify my core values. Then I had to define them. And then I had to look at all the areas of my life where it was misaligned. And it was painful. But the journey to the other side is filled with joy, peace, and confidence. It's not that everything always works out. It is that you are so sure of how you move that you don't second guess yourself in your process. Okay. Then there are transactional relationships. I give something, I get something. A cousin you only hear from when they need money. It's transactional. Now, the question becomes, what is it that you're going to get? It's not inherently bad, but it is dangerous when it's confused with something deeper. Now, there are some romantic relationships that have become transactional or that are transactional, but people keep trying to grab on and say it's love. It's okay to call it for what it is, and there's no judgment when you identify what kind of relationship you have. Is it working for you? Is it working for you? Just because it's not something else doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that you have to get rid of it, but do look to see if it is in fact serving you. Hope that makes sense. Love may not be present or it may feel conditional, right? The person seems to say, I love you when you do something. They treat you better after you've done something. Another thing that falls into these categories is thinking that a person can love you back in the way that you love them. So that you do this thing for them, and when you need it, you go to them for it when that is not in their wheelhouse. But you are holding them to those expectations. There can be some codependency and unhealthy dynamics, which include an emotional, what do they call it? Enmeshment, or lack of boundaries, and any type of relationship can fall under codependency. So that's something that you want to understand if you gravitate towards that, right? Identify what's the root. What is the root of that? And why does all this matters? Just because a relationship is founded or based in love, you love that person or that's your family, it doesn't mean that it's values based. And please really, 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 really hear me on this when it comes to your parents and your children and your siblings. Blood does not, values are not in our DNA. Priorities, standards, I don't know, all of those things could be. Haven't studied that. I don't think so, but haven't studied. Values are not in our DNA, meaning, oh, I take that back. I take that back. I'm actually going to delete that out of the video. Values, I do believe that we are born with our values. Why do I believe this? You may have grown up in a community, in a household where you were taught certain things. And to this day, you believe them in your whole heart. But there are some values that you were giving that you just regurgitate, but you actually don't believe. And you may have grown up with someone else in the household who fully believes the thing that you regurgitate that you don't believe. Oftentimes, we believe that we learned our values from the community and the family that we grew up in, when really it was just our values being affirmed. Presentation is a value for me. My mother would often say presentation is everything. But before my mother started saying that, who would write my homework over, yes, I wrote home. I didn't have computers back then. I wrote my homework, and if there was a mistake or something I stretched, I would write it over again because what I presented, I wanted it to look nice. That matters to me in every area of my life. Why? It is a value. I used to apologize, like, or let my friends make jokes and they say, "Why do you get so dressed up when you travel?" It is because presentation matters to me. I get dressed when I'm not leaving the house at all, and I'm not going to be on any Zooms. Yep. Sometimes I dress in blazers or jeans or in something that makes me feel the way I want to feel for the day because it matters to me. It is a value. And the relief and the release that came with understanding why I can't do the same thing every Friday. There are some people who have standing dinners every Friday, every month, every this day, they meet with the same people. I don't know what I want to do on the third Friday of the month. I'm not sure yet, right? Now, there's a level of routine, obviously, that I'm establishing for the Good Old Girls Network, but I make sure that variety is available to me. Why? Because variety and options matter. I also figured out that while I was really good at math, the reason why I didn't love finance positions is because it was the same thing over and over again, the same reports, the same, right? So understanding that again was a relief and a release. So I will say again, please identify your core values. And I'll tell you how to do that in a moment. Recognizing the type and quality of a relationship will help us set better boundaries, right? Because there are a lot of things we're going to see from the beginning. Now, I'm one of those people that will not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So there are times where I might be in a romantic relationship that is serving me, but I might be able to see off into the distance because of the core values that this won't be a forever relationship. Not because the person's treating me poorly, but because we don't move the same in a way that allows us to walk together. It's okay to enjoy a person. I'm not just talking about romantically. It's okay to enjoy a person for what they bring to the table and what you give, knowing how that relationship or the amount of time that that relationship can offer. We can also ask for what we need. If we are experiencing a variety of value confrontations that causes that vexation in our spirit that I talked about earlier, when now that we have language and we can say this was a value confrontation for me or that is a value confrontation for me. I'm giving examples about me because I know me best. My friends know my core values and they know that consideration is one of them. So if we're at a dinner and it starts to get really loud, rest assured they are expecting me to say, do we mean to be this loud? So I'm not saying, hey, be quiet, right? That was the old me before I understood that it was a value, right? Because remember, we think that our values don't just make sense to us, but make sense to everyone. So I would say, shh, in the past. And sometimes people will be like, why? Are we loud? No, it's a birthday party. We're having a good time. Now, I just want to know, do you all mean to be that loud? Because they may not have the value in the way that I have it. They may say, oh, yes, it's a birthday party. I may excuse myself. Because if the value confrontation gets too big for me, I'm just going to excuse me without attitude, without judgment, but just knowing that in that moment, I am removing myself because it's vexing my soul. Lastly, we know we can decide where to invest our energy so that we're not involved in relationships, familial, platonic, all the ways, romantic, that are constantly exhausting us, constantly draining us because they are not aligning with our values. When you find a relationship where your values are aligned, you will feel the most authentic and the most peace that you have ever felt. Love is not a guarantee that a relationship is meant to be close, is meant to last forever. Love to me determines how you handle it. It means that you offer what it is that you have to say in a way that does not reduce the person or judge them, but that you're just expressing yourself, but in love. In love also leaves people intact, right? That you're not trying to dismantle them or knock them off their square, as I like to say. Okay, I have a couple questions for you to answer, and then I'm going to just look in the comments just in case there's any questions or comments before we close this out. Okay, and then I'm going to talk about the Good Old Girls Network and where we are. So, reflection questions. Which relationships in my life feel most loving? Which relationships in my life feels most loving? And then part two to that is what makes them feel that way? Because that's also a way that will help you identify your values. Are there places I've mistaken responsibility for love? Are there places where I have mistaken responsibility and obligation and duty for love? Especially those of you who value loyalty. Check in. Check in. Sometimes it's hard to get you all out to sea because you're attached to the loyalty, right? So at all costs, you're not going to betray this person. You're not going to leave it. It's not betrayal. It's not betrayal to practice self-care. It's not betrayal to operate in a way that is in line with your values. As a matter of fact, it is selfless. Why? Because when your cup is full, that means that you have more to pour out elsewhere. When my cup is full, I have more to pour out. So the more self-care I do, then the more I can show up for spaces like this and not be exhausted because I've been filling my cups of life. Okay. Last question. Am I showing up with love in relationships that are built on shared values or just maintaining roles? Am I just maintaining the role, or am I showing up in love in these relationships? Lastly, I want to talk about the danger of misaligned expectations. Now, I maintain that expectations actually are dangerous in general unless they are communicated and understood and agreed upon. Communicated, understood, and agreed upon. Now, that doesn't always work, does it? So let's say I had an expectation that I was going to dine outside today, but it rained. I mean, I knew it could rain. It's the weather. We're transitioning into spring, hopefully. So I didn't hold on to that expectation so tightly that it was hard to let go. But if somebody said that, I'm interviewing for my dream job or this dream, series that I want to do for a corporation, or I finally think I got the big stage for this conference, and someone says, you're a shoo-in. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. So I'm counting my money. I'm thinking what I'm going to do. Now I know anything could happen. I say I know that, but really I am holding on to the expectation that this thing is going to happen. And then it doesn't. I'm devastated. Why? Because I was holding on like this, and it's very difficult to release that. But if you're holding on to it loosely, it might happen. It might not happen. But let me focus on trying to do everything that will get me the outcomes that I want, knowing that that may not be the thing, and not abandoning my values to get there. Now let's talk. In romantic relationships, oftentimes, I'm talking to the ladies here, we will do things in hopes of the ring, the longevity, the closeness, and it doesn't come. But we've not been paying attention to our guiding principles, our values, our standards, our priorities, and our beliefs, and our boundaries fall in our standards. We've not been paying attention to those because we want so badly for this outcome. When we do things in hopes of something else happening, and it doesn't happen, then we have resentment towards the person who didn't get what we expected it from. But where does the resentment belong? If it's going to go anywhere, right? Because what we're really upset about is the fact that we did this thing and we didn't get that thing in return. When we do things, we have to mean it. If we're doing it for only for reciprocity, right? We talked about that, transactional. We talked about transactional responsibility, duties. If we're doing it because we feel obligated, or we feel that this person then owes us something, then we're leaving ourselves open for disappointment. When anybody is heartbroken, it's not that they broke your heart, they broke your expectations. You expected something from them that they could not, would not, did not give. It doesn't actually matter why, right? If they couldn't or didn't, if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. Now, what you've got to figure out in these relationships, see, look, I said have to. We're railing against have to. What I offer to you to consider in relationship is one, the shared values, right? And also, are you getting, is the relationship serving you as it relates to your guiding principles? But if you are doing things with the expectation of an outcome, make sure that even if you don't get the outcome, you're still okay with what you're doing. One of my favorite questions to ask at the top of a keynote talk is, if I never got the outcomes I was seeking, would I still be happy with the journey? So be clear in your movements that you are aligned with your values, that you have your priorities in view, that you understand what your standards are, and that you have your belief system, but always challenging your beliefs. Sometimes we have faulty beliefs, and we only need to find one thing that isn't true in the thing we say we believe in order to sort of dismantle the whole thing. So be careful of your beliefs or ones that you can't substantiate for yourself, right? For yourself. Okay, Good Old Girls Network. Our site is under maintenance. We had a few technical issues, but I am excited about it opening up. I'm going to call it mid next week. But for any of you who are interested in knowing when we're going to launch, then please text "I'm in" to 617-485-0610. And as soon as the site is up and you are able to join the communities, we have a plethora of communities for you to get involved in, ad-free, algorithm-free. We're just finding fulfillment in the various areas of our lives: emotionally, professionally, aesthetically, parentally, financially. We have a series that has started already called 18 Minutes with wealth advisor and expert Robin A. Young. You can find out more about that on our Facebook page, also on our YouTube channel. We're going to be starting that officially on April 8th, where Robin is just asking for 18 minutes a day in order to change your financial future. So I'm excited about that. We had a live last night that'll be going up on the website. I think that is it. Oh, you can also go to thegoggin.com if you haven't already. Drop your email in. That will also get you on a list where we'll let you know some of the upcoming happenings. I'm going to just review this. Okay, the chat looks like there's no questions in here. Oh, if you would like to identify your core values, you can go to thecorevaluecompany.com, go to the resources, and at the bottom of the page, there is a link. Now, it's free. It's not a click-em test. So it's not one that you're going to click, 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 click. Oh, there's my values. My concern always about those is that people get it and then they try to live into it, versus you go through the process, you identify your values, and then you start to understand. You go put them on for size. Oh, that didn't feel good. So then you look at the values you've identified and you see, are the values that I identified ones that explain the value confrontation that I just had. So, thank you all for being here this evening. I'm trying to get better with these lives from a technical standpoint. One day I'll have a whole big team in the studio, but for now, it's just me, the rookie. And so, thank you so much for being here. Please reach out with any questions, um, and that's it. All right. Bye.